Let's talk about the minimum wage. Recently, talk about the minimum wage has been buzzing in the news as California introduced legislation to increase the minimum wage from $10 an hour to $15. Other places in North America are also considering this as a good way to assist the impoverished. As the cost of living increases and people find themselves working 2 or more jobs just to make ends meet, it's becoming apparent that we might have a problem on our hands. People all over North America are suffering thanks to wages that are inadequate for supporting a person's expenses. It seems like the proper response would be to simply raise the minimum wage. But is it that simple? While complaints about the cost of living are valid, is a minimum wage increase the answer? Is it feasible? Is it fair? Is the current system too cruel? Let's have a difficult discussion. So why is there a minimum wage? The minimum wage was instituted in the United States during the Second World War. When the issue was first mentioned, it was criticized for removing an individual's right to put their own price on their own work, but applauded for guaranteeing a minimum income. The first American minimum wage was set at 25 cents in 1942, and Canada didn't follow until the 80s, starting at $4.35. They were instituted to guarantee people weren't being taken advantage of in the workplace. Poverty and unemployment in the United States and Canada are and have been real problems, despite being among the most wealthy and stable nations in the world. And a larger minimum wage makes sense, right? More money means less problems. Someone working one job at 40 hours a week on the federal minimum wage in the US makes $15,080. Certain states can have significantly higher rates, but even the baseline is above what the government considers in poverty. However, that still doesn't change much, as that $15,000 has to cover rent, food, transportation, and insurance. Depending on where you live, that could be literally impossible. And that's before adding children, pets, or other family. And this brings us to the fact that sometimes the minimum wage isn't enough for an adult or a family to survive. And while raising wages fixes the problem on paper, is it that simple? Going back to the original complaints about the minimum wage, it forces companies to pay a certain amount of money for services, but that number isn't necessarily linked to what they can pay or the value of the work. When we think of a company, we usually imagine McDonald's, or Google, or Coca-Cola, but the majority of companies aren't large corporations. They're small, family-owned businesses that may not be able to afford these changes because the new minimum wage employee isn't making them more money all of a sudden. What happens then? Well, people lose their jobs, and eventually the owners may not be able to afford to keep their shop open. But it's not just a problem for small companies. You know those self-service kiosks that are popping up in all the fast food joints these days? That used to be someone's job. And if some fast food conglomerate has a choice between paying employees a higher rate and paying to install a self-service machine, they're not going to make the decision that considers your kids' needs. And as much as it sucks to be paid small amounts, being fired is arguably worse. Not only have you lost your job, there are just less jobs overall for people to work. Automation is a problem by itself, but increasing wages just forces the big companies to look elsewhere for low-skilled labor. And it gets worse if you're a small business. Consider this. Let's say 2 people are making $7 an hour at a fruit shop. If the government increases the minimum wage to $10, then the owners have to pay them $10. But that's not just a $3 increase. That's a $6 increase because they have to pay both employees. But it doesn't stop there. If there's a manager at the shop who is making more than the minimum wage, all of a sudden this higher skilled and more senior member of the staff is now making the same as the lowest level employees. And none of this changes how much money a store makes. In order to keep up, prices might need to be raised, or people might be fired, or the shop might close altogether. One road leads to inflation, the other to unemployment. The minimum wage is tricky because it's not as simple as it seems. Raising the wage can have huge positive and negative consequences in the long term. Some would argue that getting to keep a job that doesn't pay well is better than incentivizing larger corporations to eliminate jobs, while others would argue the opposite. Minimum wages have been adjusted many times, and things have been relatively fine. But we've never had increases this large all at once, which is where the fear comes in. The Ontario increase, 22.8%, is a lot, and some places, looking at you, California, in the States, have recently had it higher, around 50%. There are a lot of ways to help the disenfranchised, and raising the minimum wage is one of them. But often people are quick to assume that a good intentioned step in the right direction is a fix-all. So what's the answer? Should we raise the minimum wage? We don't actually know. All we know is that the answer requires a more nuanced discussion than simply raise it or don't. Have any ideas? Think we're dumb? Let's talk. Join the discussion on our website or in the comments.